You are here because the outside world rejects you.
On this episode of Cinema Disaster, we're going to be talking about the 1990 live-action film Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was based on a comic book by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, and I still, to this day, think that it's one of the best comic book adaptions, I would say like live adaptions to film, and I think that in my opinion it's still the best live action Ninja Turtles film, and it still holds up today. And once again, Sam is sitting in because he's a big Turtle fanatic, and what do you think?
It's one of my favorite movies, like, of all time, and I catch some shit sometimes for that, but I think it's actually genuinely a really good film. It's well written, well acted, it's got funny, it's got really emotional, deep kind of wisdom from Splinter at times, and I think it does a really good job of showing, how these four turtles work together and grow. I think it's fantastic, honestly. I'm not kidding. It is one of my favorite movies of all time.
And we talked about this. The name Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird's inspiration for the name came from the Teenage Mutants of the X-Men, and you said the Daredevil, but specifically Frank Miller's Daredevil. That's where the ninjas part came from.
Yeah. If you read the original run of the comics, the very first issue, and it's like really obvious, is very much an homage to Frank Miller's run on Daredevil. That's where the ninja aspect came from. And that was actually a lot of that was Kevin Eastman, who went on to, he eventually became, I don't know if you call him owner, whatever, but he went on to Heavy Metal Magazine. But Peter Laird had the sci-fi, he really liked the sci-fi, so not so much in this movie, but in the comics, there's a lot of this cross between ninja clans and sci-fi alien type stuff, and that's where that came from, and that's why it was awesome, because you had these two guys working on it, and it worked for a while till they started to not like each other, and unfortunately in the creative world that happens more often than not.
It happens quite a lot.
Yeah. But for a while it was gold, man. It was, you would get equal parts, mystical ninja fucking, swords and all that, and then you'd have an issue with aliens. And
the thing about the comics, as I remember, is they were dark. They were more adult oriented.
Yeah.
And when the cartoon came out, it was lighthearted, and then so I think.
Yeah, the cartoon right here. Yeah.
Yes, that was much more lighthearted, and I think that's why when they came out with the movie, they did use elements from the cartoon, but they also used elements from the comic
Mostly
book.
from the comic.
Mostly
yeah.
from the comic.
Yeah.
And that's why parents complained. They said it was too violent and too dark. And
Yeah.
I know you know all about this more than I do. Is that there were a lot of differences between the film, the comic, and the cartoon. What are some of those differences that maybe I or maybe the audience don't know about?
Well, as far as like the film and the comic and the cartoon, so in the cartoon, you know, a lot of people my age, they know these guys.
Oh yeah, I grew up watching it.
You know,
yeah, we all.
And it was a good cartoon. It had its flaws, but it was what it was. And interesting side note, one of the writers for this cartoon was actually Mo Howard's grandson from the Three Stooges.
Yeah.
And
classic still holds up. Stooges still hold up to this day.
Absolutely. But in the cartoon, the foot soldiers were robots. You know, they were created. And so it wasn't a big deal when the Turtles wrecked some foot soldiers. In the movie, they're actual people.
So they get killed, just like in the comic.
They do, but they don't necessarily show it in the movie. In the comic, they flat out show it. I mean, Leonardo will... There's issues where he'll impale somebody with his katana. Or Raphael, I remember there's one, I actually don't think it was a foot soldier, now that I think about it. But there's one where he takes his size like scissors and he jabs them into somebody's throat and just, you know, rips like that, and it's just blood splatter. Yeah, the comics definitely, they were not written originally with the intention of this is going to be for kids.
Yeah, that was like an afterthought. Like when the cartoon came along, and they definitely had to lighten it up a lot because they wanted to gear it towards a more make it more kid friendly because they wanted to gear it towards a kid's audience.
Yeah,
you know,
well, they wanted to make money.
Yeah, and all the toys came out, which I owned like tons of them.
Yeah, so did I. Had
the video games
almost
too.
Like all of them. Yeah, Turtles in Time.
You said you never had the Technodrome. I never had that either.
I never had the Technodrome. My cousin did, but I had like almost. Yeah, I had the Turtle Van. I had like all the action. I mean,
I had
there was a good.
Yeah.
I feel like there was a good like 3 or 4 years where every Christmas all I got was Ninja Turtles toys. And
that first Ninja Turtle game for Nintendo's was hard too, man. Super hard.
Super hard.
Yeah,
super hard.
And I remember in PE, they always had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle arcade game at the bowling alley when we'd go bowling in PE, and I remember always playing that there. And then when they finally released it for Nintendo, like I was so excited because like that
I remember
so good.
that. Yeah, I remember that day, the day I got it, and that was an awesome game.
I still like playing that to this day. And
I do too.
To this day, I don't have arcade game anymore, but I do have Manhattan Project. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, that was on what?
Well, mine's for Nintendo, but they probably released it on several things. And then I still have that original.
Yeah, that was the third one.
Yeah.
There was the original, the arcade, Manhattan Project, and then they moved on to Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
And Sega Genesis had, I think Sega had a Hyperstone Heist. That's what Sega had, which is different. And that's, if we're talking about video games, another thing I nerd out about. That was something that was really cool, was that each of those, they weren't just ports, they were different. So you got a different game. Whichever version you played, you got a different game. You know, like Hyperstone Heist, I think came out around the same time as Turtles in Time, but it was a different game. Like it wasn't just the same levels or whatever. That's pretty awesome. That's something they don't do a whole lot these days to make, you know, each iteration different.
And another thing we were talking about earlier is how like Casey Jones, Elias Cochise, that plays Casey Jones in this film, who I've always loved the character of Casey Jones.
He's fucking awesome.
That awesome scene where they're at April's with the antique store or whatever.
Yeah, her apartment / antique store.
And they're fighting the Foot Clan, and Casey Jones like
shows up,
and the whole place like catches on fire, and
the door opens. Like, that's awesome.
That whole scene is still intense, dude, because it's got like the dramatic music.
Yeah, because before that, it's whimsical.
Yeah, it's like
right?
slapstick.
Yeah, it's whimsical. The turtles are being goofy, and they're fighting. And then that moment when Casey Jones shows up and he kicks that door open, and he says, "You mind telling me what you're doing with my little green friend over there?" And then it starts playing that awesome, I mean, you can only describe it as late 80s, early 90s. I mean, I know it's 1990.
It's just right out of the 80s,
yeah,
though, so it's still got
but that
kind of
music,
feel.
yeah, that it you know that, oh shit, now this is like the real part of the fight.
The whole floor drops through, breaks out, and you said you liked Donatello's line about the Foot Clan dropping down when the floor is
Yeah, when the reinforcements for the Foot Clan show up at the sky window or whatever it's called on the roof, and the floor's been chopped up by all their axes and shit, and Donatello, who is voiced by
Corey Feldman,
he says, he looks up and sees them, and then he says, "Guys, I don't think this is such a good time, structurally speaking, for your buddies to be dropping in." And then they jump in, and the floor collapses, and they fall into the antique store.
As they escape, and they're driving away in the turtle van, and you look back, and the whole building's just on fire.
Yeah, and then they even show Danny.
Oh yeah,
he's the one who alerted the Foot Clan that the turtles were there in the first place. So I've always, like I said, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and there are things that I notice now that I didn't notice when I was a kid. That part, you got April looking back at her whole life just burning.
Oh yeah.
But then they also show Danny looking at the same thing, and as far as he knows, he's responsible for April and the turtles dying.
And he wears two shirts in the movie, and they're both Sid Vicious.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One Sid, and then one it has Sid and Nancy.
Yeah, and that's another motif that comes right out of the 80s, because I noticed that in the 80s movies, the punks are always the villains.
Yeah, punk rockers were villains.
Because not only was the satanic panic of the 80s going on, where there was this mass hysteria that bands like Ozzy and Kiss and all of them worship Satan, and they were trying to seduce the kids through the music. There was also this like panic going on about, like a moral panic about the punk music going on at the time, and there was actually a real fear growing up in the 80s. The older generation had a fear that people who were into punk, these punk rockers, were actually going to take over the world and turn it into like a dystopian like nightmare, anarchy. And they really, it sounds silly now looking back on it, but at that time that we were living in, that time with hysteria and all that stuff going on in the 80s, that was really a real fear that people had. And so that's why I think that's always incorporated, is they're the villains in all the 80s films, And I guess since this is right out of the 80s. Casey
Jones even says when he first meets Raph and they have their little fight in the park, I'm assuming it's Central Park, but he even says when Raph's hat gets knocked off, he's like, "What are you, some kind of punker? I hate punkers." So like even right there.
He says especially ones who wear green makeup.
And masks to cover up an ugly face.
Yeah. And if you notice,
but it's right there.
The movie that he comes out of, the Raphael scene in the movie, it's Critters.
Critters.
And what
yeah.
did he say about it?
He walks out and he looks up at the marquee in disgust, and then he shakes his head and goes, "Where do they come up with this stuff?" And I think that is hilarious because, I mean, I've seen Critters, and
I own it. I like it.
No, I like it, but it is a stupid movie.
Yeah, totally, but it's stupid in a good way.
But then you got a character who's a fucking mutant ninja turtle,
and he's
walking out of that movie going, "Oh, that's unbelievable."
And he's in disguise, which totally, I don't know if
it's just a trench coat and a fedora.
It looks like Humphrey Bogart's character in Casablanca, and I think you said that was an homage to that, possibly.
Yeah.
But yeah, also Ernie Rice Jr. was Donatello's stunt double in this, and then in part 2 he actually plays Keno, the pizza delivery
who's
character.
A main character.
Yeah.
Major main character.
And he was in Surf Ninjas. One cannot forget Surf Ninjas.
Yeah, you wanted me to say something about Surf Ninjas.
Well, you said that Angry Video Game Nerd, who
James Rolfe did a review in his, what does he call them? Movie review rentals.
Cinemassacre?
No, it's on Cinemassacre.
Right.
Personal hero of mine, but...
Mine too.
They totally hit the nail on the head. They did a review of Surf Ninjas, and they talk about how there's not even a nostalgia factor for Surf Ninjas. It is just everything cliche from the early 90s put into a movie. And even Three Ninjas, somebody, I don't know if it was James, somebody in that video talks about how even Three Ninjas might have something that you watch it now and you're like, oh,
Rob Schneider's like, what do you say, 30 in that movie, but he's playing like a...
Yeah, I think they talk about Rob Schneider is supposed to be 30.
Or he is 30.
He is 30, I think, at that time.
To it.
And he's supposed to be playing like a 16-year-old, and it just, it is... Surf Ninja's not good.
Yeah, but you should see it so you know exactly how bad we're talking here.
Yeah.
Let's also talk about, like, all the costumes were made from Jim Henson's Creature Shop.
And they did amazing.
They did, and I still, to this day, prefer the characters in costume to CG.
Yeah, and I'm still amazed that in 1990, they could get, like, on the Turtles and Splinter, they could get the range of facial expressions.
Yeah, I mean, and the costumes still look great. Watching it, like, 28 years later, it still looks good. Almost 29 years later.
Looks awesome. Amazing.
Like this, I got this, right? This movie is probably 28, almost 29 years old, because I was a kid when this came out, and I remember getting this at the store when it first got released on video. And you said you went to see it at the movie, and you got a poster.
Yeah, I had a poster. I had a poster for the first and the second one. And actually, funny enough, I remember, so that was 1990, I was 6.
Yeah.
And I remember going to see the movie at Cottonwood, I think opening night with my mom, and it was sold out. There was a line literally out the door, which I don't know if you remember how Cottonwood was set up.
Yeah, I remember.
But the theater was like, when I say out the door, I mean like out to the parking lot.
Yeah.
And we didn't get in, but then the next night we did. But I don't know. I always remember that. I was a little kid, and my mom was like, "Oh, you want to see Ninja Turtles? I'll take you to see it." And there was just like this huge line of like teenagers, you know.
I went and saw part 1 and 2 in the theaters.
I saw part 2 in the theater too.
Another thing I want to mention is that
and part 3.
See, I haven't seen part 3, but
part 3 sucks.
We'll talk about that in a second. When this movie came out, the first Ninja Turtles film, it was released by New Line Cinema, which at that time, they were mostly only known for like releasing the Nightmare on Elm Street films and some other like B-horror films. So this was like its first, one of its first, like, different, releasing something different.
It was like a branching out.
Yeah, I mean, it still obviously falls into the sci-fi category. It could still be considered to be a movie, cult film. Well, it is a cult film now.
Yeah.
But
it wasn't like a horror.
Right, it wasn't
themed.
horror. You know.
It was, yeah.
But yeah, I still think the same kind of people that like Nightmare on Elm Street would probably still like this film.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it got turned down by Warner Brothers and a bunch of others anyway, because they thought that it wouldn't do well or whatever.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about Warner Brothers these days, because
they
don't know what they're doing.
Also in the UK, it was edited. They edited out all the weapons in this, and also they removed
in the actual film.
In the actual film, I mean, there is a unedited version now released over there, but at that time when the movie came out, the UK version had no weapons.
I knew they changed the name to Hero Turtles instead of Ninja Turtles, but I didn't realize they actually in the movie they edited out all the weapons.
Yeah, they used different cuts
Jesus
and stuff.
Christ, that movie must have sucked.
But you remember, though, that all the backlash and protest from the parents of this film being too violent and dark led to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Secret of the Ooze being where they couldn't use their weapers. They still had them, but they didn't use them. They just fought. And then eventually,
even in the cartoons, they never pulled their weapons out. Eventually, they just... If I remember correctly, eventually they just didn't even have them. They all used, like, grappling hooks, which I don't understand. Like, okay, so nunchucks are too violent, so they give Michelangelo a grappling hook to throw at... I mean, I guess...
And if you watch...
I don't know. It's just weird and stupid to me.
If you watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie... and then part 2, back to back. Totally different tone.
Yeah, part 2 is way more, like, goofy.
It's a lot cheesier. I mean, 1 has cheese to it, but it's cheese in a good way.
Yeah.
2, the cheese, not so much in a great way, even though I still like the film.
I like it, and a lot of that is nostalgia.
Yeah.
And it's got Vanilla Ice. And
does.
Kevin Nash.
Yeah.
Kevin Nash.
Super Shredder.
Plays Super Shredder, so... If for any wrestling fans out there, Kevin Nash is Super Shredder in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: Secret of the Ooze.
And what we totally...
I actually, speaking of Secret of the Ooze, I actually do like that in that movie they kind of, even though it's not where the comics went with it, I do like that they address where the ooze came from and why. And then the turtles themselves have a dilemma because, by the way, spoiler, for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, it turns out it was just an accident.
Yeah.
It was just an accident. So they actually, I do commend that movie for having, even touching on that. The turtles kind of are conflicted in that movie, like, so we are just freaks. Like, we're just accidents.
Yeah.
You know, like, we were never supposed to happen. And I thought that was cool. But it is super cheesy.
Another thing we passed over in the first movie that we were going to talk about was that song at the end, the Turtle Power song, which I always thought...
Power.
Right. I always thought was by Shock C, which is the singer for Digital Underground. Because to me, it sounds exactly like Shock C. But I found out that it is not. It's not. It's by a band called Partners in Crime, or a group called Partners in Crime. But, man, like, I used to hear that song on the radio. I think I had the single cassette of it when I was, back when the movie came out. I used to have all those lyrics memorized. It was cool hearing it again tonight on the movie, you know?
Yeah.
You were talking about the opening song. You like that, but I don't know who does it. You don't know either.
I don't know either. I don't know the name of it, but yeah, the song after, because it opens with the crime wave shit and April talking, and then the song that plays immediately after they save April the first time, and Raph loses a sigh, and the other three are walking back in the sewer, and it's a da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Like, that's, I mean, I guarantee you that's, like, 95% nostalgia for me, but I love that song. Like, every time I hear that song, I can't help but be like, I'm in a good mood.
So as far as the Turtles Legacy, we need to talk about this before we go. So next is the one I haven't seen, Turtles in Time. You can briefly mention that one. You said it's terrible, but
it is. It was like a made-for-TV movie that came out in theaters. It's, if you think Part 2 is cheesy, then gee, Part 3 is fucking horrendous. It's cheesy in all the wrong ways. They bring back Casey Jones. That's
is
cool.
It still Elias Coates?
Yeah, same guy. And it's the same girl that plays April in TMNT Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2.
Paige Cotton, is that?
Yeah, I guess. Whatever, because you know it's a different actor.
Yeah, because Judith Hoag was her in the first film.
Right. But they lost a lot of their budget. The Turtles all look the same, which is something I like about the first one and the second one, is that every turtle they look unique. Like, if you hold those suits up and you examine them, their faces are different, their eyes are different, their skin color even is a little different. In the third one, they all look exactly the same. They just have different colored bandanas.
Do they have different personalities like the other ones or not?
Sort of.
Sort of.
But it's not, I mean, it's still, it's almost like an exaggeration of their personalities.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they were probably trying to go more for the cartoon feel in the third one. Yeah, and I don't know, I just don't like it. It's,
even though I caught you watching it one night after we all played, we played a show somewhere,
well,
and then I woke
I'm
up
not gonna not watch it.
You did a marathon, like
by myself.
You were awake while everyone else in the band was asleep.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about why.
We don't. And but I woke up and caught you watching Turtles 3, and I'm like, you're actually watching Part 3? I thought you hated this movie. And you're like, I'm doing a marathon, man.
Yeah, it's sometimes I'm a completionist, and I don't know. I just don't like it. It was, to me, it feels like a movie that's just out of place.
Yeah, and they've also did like several reboots. There was the TMNT, which was like a CGI animated, and the Joel Schumacher's, right?
You're thinking of Batman.
Yeah, I'm thinking of how Joel Schumacher ruined the Batman.
You're thinking of Batman,
right? That's for a whole another video.
Yeah, so there's two new movies, and they were not directed but produced by Michael Bay. Oh, not a Michael Bay fan. But they were directed by someone else, and I will say one of the redeeming qualities about those two movies, I mean, they're totally cringeworthy at points, but one of the redeeming qualities is that whereas the first, the 1990 film really closely followed the comic book, these two newer movies kind of go more towards the cartoon. And that is kind of neat.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
I haven't seen them yet, so I can't comment.
It is kind of neat to see that, but I'm glad I didn't pay money to see those movies, because overall they're not that great.
Well, there's another cartoon too, right?
Oh, geez, there's been so many cartoons.
Right, well, I mean, that was the current...
The original... There was one in the early 2000s that was on Fox. There was one... I think Nickelodeon has had two different versions in the past, 10 years.
I'm thinking of one of the ones that happened in the past 10 years, I think.
Yeah,
so
those would be...
I think it's Nickelodeon.
Nickelodeon, and I don't know. I haven't watched them. I don't know what their story is...
So, but see, the Turtle Legacy, it's still going strong.
Yeah.
You know, still out there.
Yeah.
It just shows, man, people love these characters. And, you know,
Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, man,
they created a masterpiece.
They did.
You know, and
a monster franchise.
And it wasn't even on purpose to create a franchise, and it just happened.
No, and something else I want to say real quick is that, you know, when I was a little kid, growing up in the midst of all that Ninja Turtle hype.
Yeah, the mania.
That was, like, almost unprecedented. Like,
it was huge, man.
It was insanely huge. Like, I mean, at the time, it was on the level of, like, if not surpassing at that moment, at its peak, it rivaled, like, Star Wars, or, you know what I mean? Like, the toys, the shirts, all the franchising things, merchandising that they were able to do was just insane. Lunch boxes, Jesus. Yeah. Like, that was kind of like, you don't see that a lot.
Yeah, it wasn't like the 80s, because, you know, like, Masters of the Universe was huge, you know, and Mask, and you had Thundercats.
Mask, I remember.
You had all that stuff, and of course I owned all that stuff, you know, and it was just like huge marketing for all this stuff. And Teenage Mutant, which Star Wars started all of that marketing, you know, for toys and like Star Wars, everything. And so everything in the 80s, you know, like followed that. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is no exception. They certainly followed in that mass marketing like thing, you know, scheme or whatever.
I remember
successfully.
I remember going to like stores when I was a kid, and there'd be almost an entire aisle of Ninja Turtle. Like, Ninja Turtles, like, there'd be like G.I. Joes, Transformers, and all that kind of stuff. And then there'd just be like a wall of Ninja Turtles action figures and accessories.
Exciting it was to walk into that aisle when you got to the store.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it was just like you'd found the promised land. You know, just like.
Yeah. And it was, you know, and like, and then the toy line, like, passed up everything. The movies, the cartoons, even the comics. And it was like, you'd see a toy, an action figure, and you're like, I don't even know who that is. Like, who the fuck is this? I don't even know. But I want it, you know? Like
Mondo Gecko he came with a skateboard, which I was a skater, so that was an awesome one.
I want to point out, real quick, because Turtles started as a comic, one action figure I do remember getting, Usagi Yo Jimbo.
Yep. The rabbit.
Yeah, and that's from a whole nother comic.
Really?
That was around before Ninja Turtles. Stan Saki created Usagi Yojimbo. Or, I hope I'm saying it right. Usagi Yojimbo. And, yeah, it's probably a whole nother video we could do or something.
Yeah, whole thing about toys. Baxter Stockman.
But I watching the movie, thinking about the toys, I wanted to point that out, that Usagi Yojimbo, that was a crossover. In a way, we're pretty lucky that there was ever an action figure.
I owned it.
For that character, because that's a different comic that they did a crossover with.
I always wanted to, as a kid, you know, I always wanted to steal the, now I'm promoting theft now, right? No, as a kid, I always wanted to steal the canisters at the bank, because they looked like the ooze canisters, and I wanted to fill it up with like the goop.
Ones that shoot up the tube.
Because they sold like the slime and all that stuff was on the market back then. I just wanted to get one of those and just fill it up with like green slime.
Yeah.
So, I never did it though.
Ghostbusters. That was another toy line that had the slime and the goop.
That was the pink.
Yeah, they had the pink.
Yeah.
And Turtles had the green. Yeah.
And then you could buy, like, for 25 cents, you get, like, a little plastic bubble of, like, Goop or Gak or whatever, you know. And Gak was Nickelodeon.
Gak was Nickelodeon.
But, yeah, we're getting way off subject now. And we've been talking to you for almost 40 minutes, so none of you are probably here still. If you are...
Holy shit.
If you are, good job. You made it. So, until next time, we're going to have to wrap this up. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 1990 live action. If you've never seen it, see it. If you have seen it, see it again.